If that's the desire of council, it's certainly amazing to bring something back.
I call this meeting of the Salem City Council for a work session to order. I need someone to call roll.
Yeah. Steve, could you drop the slide? Councilor Kaiser?
Present.
Councilor Anderson?
Ditto.
Councilor Nanke?
Here.
Councilor Leung? Here. Councilor Ossick?
Here.
Councilor Hoy?
Here.
Councilor Cook? Here. And Councilor Lewis?
Here.
And Mayor Bennett?
Here. Okay, will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Maybe. Stop the button.
Good, we're off to a really good start here. Okay, great. Ready? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We don't have any additions or deletions. I would alert you that you do have copies of testimony we've received. If you'd like to review those, if you haven't had an opportunity yet. And then I'd like to turn it over to City Manager Powers to kind of set the stage for this.
Thank you, Mayor Bennett, and thank you, councilors, for being here. It's been a full city day for you volunteers. I'd like to congratulate the mayor on a fantastic State of the City address. Tonight is council's opportunity to provide further direction on the 2019 policy agenda. The policy agenda is City Council making its priorities for action in 2019 clear to the community and to the organization to help us provide direction on helping us align resources towards the results desired by the community as determined by council. To assist council this evening, staff have prepared reports and have provided suggested or recommended next steps for the issues raised by council in November. And you should have those reports either online or a paper copy. The staff work is intended to inform you as you make decisions where to spend finite resources, including your time in a work session setting or task forces or other forums where you again are volunteering your time to help the community. It's also in a setting of finite organizational time, the time of staff, certainly a budget that's finite, and also community capacity. As you consider the issues to advance in 2019, we are an organization that I believe is in a time of continuation and restraint. As you can see from the slide, the city has launched some very aggressive, ambitious policy initiatives, again, that were highlighted by the mayor this afternoon. And some of these tonight are part of the updates, part of the staff reports, and others are not. Others are well on their way and are really a continuation of city policy direction from previous years. We do, I believe, have a need over a multi-year period to align our revenues with expenditures for many of the city services. So that's also a consideration I would ask you to keep in mind as you consider the issues this evening. Also, maintaining our existing services is a challenge. I've asked the department directors for some preliminary budget proposals, and and so far the total for the general fund is about $2 million more than what we're currently spending, which will be a challenge for us in the future, later this year. So I'd ask you to keep those considerations in mind as you go through the policy agenda. Again, thank you for your time being here this evening. I know it's been a long day for many of you. Certainly a long day for all of you when considering your day jobs. Brian Brian Scott will now help us by taking us through the rest of the evening. We do want to be respectful of your time and try to keep this to about a 2-hour time frame.
Mr. City Manager, could you go back to the first slide? Councilor Kaiser and I just kind of have a question. Well, it was my question, and she agreed that was a question. What are the all caps underneath the bolds? How is that? Why is that differentiated between the regular capitalization, if there is any?
Councilor Anderson, my name is Courtney Knox-Bush, and I work in the city manager's office. And the difference is those things that are in italics are things that are ongoing service commitments. That's how we described them in the annual community report that's on your desk as well and online. And those things that are in regular font are just things that were part of the 2018 policy agenda priorities.
Thank you.
It's okay. Okay. Any other questions for the city manager? Right, Brian.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Brian Scott, BDS Planning. My job tonight is to be the facilitator. I'll be assisted by Gabriel Silberblatt, also with BDS. Our task tonight is to try what we got together at a work session at the end of the year, and on that night you identified items to be considered for your 2019 council policy agenda, and asked staff to do some background research so they could brief you on what it would mean if we put those things on the policy agenda. And you got the staff report on that several days ago, and then I think you have this handout that just outlines the headings that just is kind of a cheat sheet to remember what they are. And basically our job tonight is to identify which of these items you want to be on your agenda for council work this year. And it seemed to us that in sorting out what decision we want to get from you tonight, we want to take each of the items that are on here, and there's 15 or 16 of them, and we want to, I think my job as a facilitator is to get you to decide if it's a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4 on this list. And so the definition of these matter. It seems to me the number 1 is it's a policy agenda item. And what we mean by it's on the policy agenda means that you as the council are going to spend some time on it this year. It's something that you might have a work session. If you are going to have a work session, that's going to involve some additional staff analysis. There may be council action. There may be budget impacts to it. So it's something that you think it's important, and therefore you're going to dedicate some of your time to it. That'd be a number 1. A number, and a good example of that would be something that might have budget impacts, but it isn't exactly clear what the council is thinking tonight. So we'd need to have a work session to sort that out. So it would require some council action. If there's something that might require some budget consideration, but it's pretty clear what your direction is, what your thinking is, then we could give it a number 2, which would be it's a priority item, and the council is asking the city manager to consider this item in the context of the city's budget's needs for its possible inclusion in the FY 2020 budget. So it's not something the council is going to spend time on during this year, but you do want the manager to think about it when he's preparing the next budget. Number 3 would be something that because there are so many other things in the number 1 and number 2 category, you're not going to get to it this year, but it's still important, and it's going to need to wait for the 2020 or 2021 policy agenda. So basically deferring, that would be number 3. And number 4 means that we can remove it from further consideration at this time, which I can think of a lot of reasons that might happen, but perhaps it's been covered by another one of them, or events have changed since it first got put onto this list, or you've changed your thinking. So that'd be something just basically saying we're going to take it off the list for now. Do those 4 alternatives seem clear?
Could we have them written somewhere to remind us? 1, 2, 3, 4, or I can really quick just write them down? You'll remind us
That's
of
a
the
good
time.
suggestion. Gabriel's going to write down on this big matrix that will appear before you, he's going to write down a policy agenda item, budget issue, future issue, and remove as those categories. So if that's enough to help clarify it. Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Brian. Are we looking at this cheat sheet, as you called it, or are we looking at the memo from the staff when we're going 1 through 4 on things?
Well, they should, I'm hopeful that
The cheat sheet includes 1 through 4.
The cheat sheet is just the headlines from
Okay.
the staff memo.
Okay.
So the content is in the staff memo, but we thought it might be easier to have just kind of the heading. And I'm going to use the cheat sheet to just kind of make sure we're going through these one by one. As Steve Powers talked about your schedule for the year and the council work sessions that you have, there's a finite number of those work sessions, and 3 or 4 of them have already been identified. And so you only have like 5 or 6 or 7 additional work session times without having extra meetings. So if you pick every one of these as a number 1, you are giving yourself probably more work than you want to do. So I'm just trying to say that there's some limit to how many of these you put on number 1, because every time you do it means you're going to spend time on it, and staff's going to spend some time supporting that in the context of you got a tight budget and you've only got as much time as you've got. So we'll go ahead and go through it, and as we go up here, we're gonna fill out this matrix to kind of keep score on where you are, and our goal is to say which did you pick 1, 2, 3, or 4 on each of these. Gabriel will write a few notes about kind of what your direction is, and as we move on, if there's too many of them in the number 1 category, then we might have to have a discussion about whether that's really realistic. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's where we are. We can bring the screen up and turn the slides off. And the first item on this list in the order, I hope it's the same order as the detailed memo, but the first one on the cheat sheet is the general fund revenue strategy, which is a carryover from the 2018 revenue task force. And you already have a city council work session scheduled for February 27th of this year. So one way to look at this is it's a no-brainer that it's a number 1 because it's already scheduled, but
And Brian, if I may, this is a result of the Sustainable Services Revenue Task Force that council created. That the task force has requested an opportunity to present its report, and the one of the first available dates, and the one that I thought would work well for an ongoing discussion leading into your budget considerations is that February date.
Councilor Anderson.
Thank you. I presume all we're doing now is setting priorities, because I certainly have some things that I would like to discuss at that February session that are other potential revenue generators that were not recommended or maybe even discussed, I'm not sure, with the Revenue Task Force. I don't, in interest of time, we obviously aren't going to discuss the merits of those, but I presume that the February, whatever date it is at the work session, we can raise these issues, and I'll raise them before so we can have some staff response before we come to the work session.
Yeah, I think certainly if council concurs with the recommended placement of this item, that would then give us the direction to come back to you seeking what additional issues you would like to have be part of that revenue discussion, that work session, for that work session.
Great, thank you very much.
And I don't want to try and resolve any of these tonight, but if you want to give staff a heads up what's coming, I don't think anybody would object. So does this one seem sort of obvious to me that it was a number 1, but it's your decision, so. Yes. Body language says you all agree with me. Okay, so that one's easy. So that's a number one, and if counselors have things that they want to be discussed at the February 27th work session, they'll alert Manager Powers of that before that time. All right? So then the second item is key performance indicators. That's data and new information to support good governance and tying decisions to priority-based budgeting. The staff's recommended next step was reconvening City Council's Sustainable Services Workgroup.
And this is a need for some, I guess, a reality check on making sure there are measures that are meaningful to counselors, that are meaningful to the community, and not just an internal organizational exercise that lacks really the impact for decision-making and budget allocation. So that's the little more background on why we're suggesting the reconvening of councils, that work group.
So if I'm following, I think that makes it a number 2. We don't need a work session, but we want it in the list. Is that?
Does that seem logical, Steve? Okay. Other thoughts on that?
If we've got the other one as number 1, we need to have this to help us. So yeah, I would say it's at least a 2, and it may be sort of subsumed in the work session at some point.
Anybody else have thoughts on this one? Councilor Kaiser. Kaiser, sorry.
The Sustainable Services Work Group, was that a council subcommittee? I don't recall now. Or did it involve other people? It was just the subcommittee. Okay.
It's a subcommittee. I think we had, I can't remember if we had other members to it. Do you remember, Tom?
I think there was I think Sally was on it.
McCoy, myself, and were you on it too, Nate?
No, there were 4 of us.
Council.
Yeah, Matt, okay.
Okay. We'll take a look at that and check with everybody, make sure it works for you. Still, you still would like to be involved on that.
Councilor Osek, did you have something you want to say?
I was just going to say, to Tom's point, the really aligns a lot with the revenue strategy, because that's how we're going to determine what to prioritize for. So getting that to tie into the budget is going to be very important.
So this one's a number.
We could also look at getting that group together before this comes to a work session on the 22nd. So we'll expedite that meeting.
Is a new AV system a number 1?
Seems to me we were having this same conversation the last time I was here.
Okay.
Okay, ready to move on to the Salem Public Library. This is questions about the Salem Public Library renovation, staffing levels, and programming. Propose a council committee to stay engaged with the library renovation project, as the notes from your last session. Staff's recommendation was that you get periodic information reports in 2019, create a city council subcommittee to provide oversight for the council library, or for the library seismic retrofit project, and any policy change with a budget impact be considered in the context of the city manager's budget needs through the city manager's FY 2020 proposed budget.
One question I'd have, would we be confined by the recommended next steps portion of this?
No.
No, okay, so we can talk about other issues.
Yeah, you could, that was what staff concluded.
Okay,
Well, they're just suggestions.
okay.
Councilor Cook?
I feel that, especially since we've had a lot of public interest and involvement, because we did have a lot of support publicly for the library bond, I really feel strongly about prioritizing this in the work that we're doing tonight. It gives a good buffer to be able to make sure that people are understanding information, that they are engaging, and that it's ensuring good fiscal responsibility with the bond and the work that we're doing. It allows for that extra touch along the way, because I think I think everyone wants this project to be successful, and the community values the library, not only for the services, but also with the collection. So I think it really speaks to this being prioritized.
And so I think you're supporting a council subcommittee on this, as Councilor Anderson.
Following up on, I think what, excuse me, both the mayor and Councilor Cook said, Mayor said, can we expand this to what the points are? And Sally talked about the collection. There's been a whole lot of public interest in this, and, you know, I don't understand what is the correct policy and what is done in libraries, and, you know, there's some differing views on what should be done, and I'd like to find out, because at some point, we move from an administrative level decision in the library to what a policy decision is. So I suggest this might be a good topic for one of our limited work sessions.
Would you agree that maybe this one could, with some more thought and maybe some more discussion, we could look at moving it forward? Maybe not tonight, but make it a number 2. We've got a way to get there. In terms of just this subcommittee, and we've got that all scheduled, that will be an opportunity to really open up what the problems are, you think?
I think, Mr. Mayor, that makes a lot of sense. My concern is that people showed up for the bond.
Right.
People support the bond. And I think that credibility and that trust that people have placed in us, this is a way to demonstrate that it is not misplaced.
Right.
And that there are, obviously, when you're walking, sometimes people trip, sometimes there's missteps, sometimes you change directions, but we're all in it together, and I think this is really an important step in that process.
I just think there's a couple issues at play here in this one item. So the first is, should we establish a council subcommittee for the oversight of the bond? Yes. I mean, we're doing that now with the police facility. We need to do that. That's separate from the kind of policy thing we're talking about. So, I mean, I think it would make sense to break these up, even though it's all of the library. I think the committee can be 2. The policy thing probably needs to be a 1. We probably need to talk about that more, would be my guess.
If I, just to clarify, Councilor Kaiser, how would that relate to the other existing boards for the library, since we do have a library advisory board, foundation board, friend board?
The difference in my mind is, with the police facility, we have a council subcommittee focused on the building of the police facility. So we have monthly meetings about how the project's going, the budget, the public information, that sort of thing. So it's separate from any kind of advisory body like the library board is, or the I forget what it's called, the policing community board. It's a separate thing because it's a discrete project. Yeah. So that subcommittee will end when that project is completed.
That's
okay. I think I understand.
It's really well taken.
So it seems likely, based that you're going to have a council subcommittee to oversee the bond implementation. And the question before us is, do you also want to have a work session or some council work on broader library policy triggered by this discussion about the collection?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, they can, and as council is considering it, the mayor was asking regarding the library advisory board. The library advisory board is discussing the collection development policy, and I realize in November, council listed some other issues regarding the library, not exclusively the development policy. However, the library advisory board is discussing the development policy at its February meeting.
So,
Councilor Cook.
thank you. You need to call on me. So, just to clarify, City Manager, can we ask for a report from the Library Advisory Board? I know they advise us, but I would be interested, since we have boards doing this work and people committed to these projects, if we ask for feedback, and then, as the mayor mentioned, are we then limited by their recommendation, or can we say, based on this recommendation, we're wanting some additional work? We want to know what attendance is like. We want to know about programming. We want to know about collection. We want to know this information, and have them report back to us. Really make better use of them, I think, as far as interacting between that board and the council.
Yes and yes.
Yay.
Councilor Anderson.
Well, and we've just been discussing the collection policy,
Yeah.
which to me means it's an issue that ought to be in front of the council
Yeah.
because it's a policy that we set. And, you know, I don't know which is, they're clearly two, not diametrically opposed, but there's two issues, there's two views of this on either end of the spectrum. And somebody's going to have to decide. And if it is, in fact, a policy, it ought to come up to us at some point to do that. And of course, the Library Advisory Board, we want to hear what they have to say. But at some point, it ought to come up to us for some sort of discussion.
So would it be safe to say that you do want to have a work session on it, but maybe a little later in the year because you want to give the library board some time to come to you with something?
I think to go back to Councilor Kaiser's point, first off, having a group that oversees the bond is going to be really important, just like with the police station. I think being able to make better use of the Library Advisory Board, I'm wondering if that would be redundant. If we have the Library Advisory Board doing the work, we're asking for the report, and then we make the final decision, then we have a subcommittee group aligned to essentially present back to us, and then we've got competing groups, but we're still making policy decisions. So I would say the temporary status of the bond going through and then making use of the permanent Library Advisory Board may be, well, I'm open to discussion on that. That's my concern.
So what I'm hearing, I hear broad consensus that there should be a subcommittee to oversee the library bond, and maybe we should make a note of that in the number 2 column. I think that's going to happen. And then the question is, do you just defer to the library board,
No.
or do you want to have a council policy activity in response to what the board is doing?
I think Councilor Anderson really summarized it well. There is a policy decision we have made about, and the issue at hand right now is the collection. There may be others. They will report to us. We will respond with a policy decision based on their recommendation and other information we gather. And I wonder if that might not be the way to have that handled. Unless we see it as so complicated, we want to have a work session and we'll just use some day that we've got available to us. We'll know if we can't find an answer.
Yeah, that makes sense, because, right, we'll have an opportunity to see the report and determine whether we need a work session rather than assuming we need one if the board has done the work for us and has presented us a recommendation.
I agree with Councilor Osek. And in effect, we could be operating as a committee of the whole, not a subcommittee.
Right. So we're going to await the report.
So what I'm hearing is there will be a subcommittee relative to the bond implementation, and whether or not you need a work session on policy to be determined based on what goes on with the board and how events unfold.
Yes.
Great.
Is that a number 2?
I think that's a number 2 with sort of an asterisk that it might rise up.
We can sort that out later.
We reserve the right to change our minds.
Yeah. As always.
Yeah.
Somehow I think that goes without saying. So the next one is the Downtown Homeless Solution Task Force, as defined at your last work session. Include recommendations from the Downtown Homeless Solutions Task Force come forward at our January meeting, specifically Downtown Good Neighbor Partnership, more public toilets, more storage space for personal possessions of those experiencing homelessness. And staff's analysis and recommendation was discussion of implementation at a future council work session or work group, any policy change or project with a budget impact to be considered in the context of the city's budget needs through the manager's FY 2020 budget, and the FY 2019 urban renewal budget has capacity proceed with implementation of projects per city council direction after discussion of trade-offs. So I think that's a staff recommendation that this is a number 1, and that it's going to take some staff work going forward.
Yep.
I see nodding heads all around, so maybe that one's easy. Councilor Osik, you're not nodding your head, conspicuously not nodding your head.
The only thought is that, as I recall from the detailed report, there's a potential proposal to have a sort of committee set up to oversee some of this work, kind of a governance body, including some of the nonprofit partners and things. So, I mean, it might be something where we were talking about we might be using that more than having the council dig into, have multiple sessions on, then have the group report back to us.
The way I understand it at the moment would be that that group would do everything you say, but you're anticipating that it is going to be a work session to deal with their recommendations. That's how I'm
So
seeing it.
after we've gotten information rather than
Right, you're not going to try and
taking it off.
beat them to the finish line on the recommendations. You're going to wait and respond. Councilor Cook.
Outside of the policy work, this final bullet that the 2019 urban renewal budget has capacity to proceed with the implementation of projects, just clarifying that would be the restrooms and also the possible lockers. Is that what we're looking at, or how many steps would be in place? Because wouldn't that make it agenda 1 then, if it already has the funding?
Go ahead.
Kristen Rutherford, Urban Development Director. When we speak to the capacity within the urban renewal budget, we're directly referencing a potential property acquisition and capacity for that, which then could accommodate potentially the 24/7 restroom access and storage as a part of that property acquisition. And then secondly, establishing a grant program to help properties with site security types of issues within the urban renewal area. So we have capacity for both of those kinds of undertakings.
Councilor Kaiser.
Yeah, so I think what we need to do is to have a work session as a council soon, very soon, before the budget committee is done, to talk about all of the implementation strategy that staff has provided, and then get into those nitty-gritty details. I think the thing that Councilor Ossick, you were alluding to is the Downtown Good Neighbor Partnership, which is a recommendation of the task force. I think we need to talk about that as a council and what that might look like, because it was never really, we talked about it at the task force, and it was defined to an extent, but there was never any real concrete decisions about who would lead it and that sort of thing included. So I would say that the recommended next steps are good for this. We need to meet about it as a council and talk about all of the specific recommendations.
I agree with Councilor Kaiser.
So I'm hearing this pretty broad consensus. This is a number 1, and you want to make sure that the work session is timely so it intersects with budget issues. Councilor Anderson.
Brian, you may or may not know this, but there's been a concern about the issue about are we feeding people under the bridge or not feeding people under the bridge, and the reasons why. And there are also, we actually talked about this last time, that there are places within 100 yards to also feed people, just not under the bridge. But this is the sort of thing that we need to do as soon as possible so we can get the information out there and assure the public and provide what we can for the people who need the food. And it may already be provided, but we need to know all this information. So,
Okay.
and I know we're getting reports next meeting, but still, the sooner the better as far as I'm concerned on this.
Councilor Lewis.
Yeah, I'll just bring this up, the possible work session. There's really only one date that I see that would work for what everybody's looking for, and that's April 15th. And if that's the case, can we solidify that date now for this purpose?
If I may, before you respond to Councilor Lewis's request, I guess a question for you this evening is we do have from a carryover from last year, the streetscape project, and right now we've got that penciled in for February 19th. So if council would be willing to consider having 2 topics on one work session agenda, we could accommodate or at least the initial council discussion of the downtown recommendations on the 19th, and then carry it over to the 15th of April if more discussion was necessary from council.
So I'm hearing this is a number 1, and sooner rather than later is the message from council. All right. So the next one is neighborhood enhancement, as characterized in your last session. Questions about neighborhood enhancement division to include neighborhood association support services, neighborhood partnership program, and code compliance. Staff's analysis is any issue with a budget impact be considered in the context of the city's budget needs through the manager's FY 2020 proposed budget. So I think that's a staff recommendation that this is a number 2, and it doesn't require council action until you get to the budget. Everybody that's weighing in with body language is that makes sense. So I'm going to say that one is a number 2, follow the staff recommendation. The next one is the Sobering Center. From your last session, questions about how to fund or whether to fund the Sobering Center funding gap. And staff's analysis and recommendation is continue work on closing the operating gap with final budget impact to be considered in the context of the manager's FY 2020 proposed budget in the context of the other cities' budget needs. So that again would be a staff recommendation that this basically goes straight to budget. Councilor Cook, did you?
I would like some more information on this. The report was really nice, but would this be an appropriate time to ask for more info? If with the Sobering Center, I'm just looking at if we're not able to secure partnership funding, what other options we would have, and I'm curious about things like peer court or drug court and how they're already being utilized in our area, and if that would at all impact the same population or have the same way to help kind of deal and mitigate with some of these issues. I don't know if there would be any overlap, but I'm kind of trying to see if we're committed to this project, but our partners aren't ready yet, what else can we do?
Steve, do you want to
go first? Yeah, you go.
Speaking to the partners, there are partners at the table. Certainly the amounts of contribution are still a work in progress, and that would be certainly a consideration that I would have as I present my proposed budget to you later this year. The partners are at the table. Regarding overlap with other programs, drug court or other programs, it might be helpful for Police Chief Moore to speak first to the benefits that we see from a public safety, safe community perspective on the Sobering Center, and then Chief, if you're able to perhaps speak to, at least from your experience, your perhaps limited knowledge, because we don't have the judge here. I mean, I don't know if Dan might be able to speak to it in terms of where there might be some or not be overlap with other programs to help those who are suffering from overuse of alcohol.
Excuse me, before the chief goes, we do have the judge here.
Oh,
Judge
great.
Akins here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, Jerry Moore, Chief of Police. I think there is certainly going to be some overlap between the folks that would be involved in the, that we might take to the Sobering Center because of both addictions to alcohol or drugs. I think that's fairly common. The Sobering Center is designed primarily for alcohol issues and is not currently designed or set up to deal with drug addiction or some of the drug problems. So that would be an issue. I think when we bring someone in for into a Sobering Center, however, the way it's set up, there is the potential that that is the first step for someone to have a discussion about not only sobering up, but detox and then treatment in the future. But that's basically what the Sobering Center is set up for. But I do think some of those clientele, if arrested, would certainly be candidates for drug court or some of those other, and I think that's what you were talking about.
So Chief Moore, as far as, I'm just looking at the gap, and I know City of Salem has stepped up. We're committed to this project and believe in the treatment model. I'm just trying to look at, if we are not able to secure that funding, what are some options on the table, how we can still make an impact, both for people in the service and also people suffering?
Well, I think our options would be to work as we work today. The Sobering Center doesn't exist, and if we have situations where we take someone into custody and the courts determine that that person is a candidate for a drug court, then that's something that they do. We haven't had a sobering center for many, many years. It's been a gap in my entire career, quite frankly, except for short periods of time. And it's been identified as something that we feel could help people on their first step to recovery, and maybe just as important, it would give us a tool to remove people from situations where they haven't necessarily committed a crime, but they are unable to care for themselves, and they're creating a situation where a neighborhood or a business district is concerned about their behavior.
Thank you.
I think the other thing too, Counselor, as this goes through the budget process, we will, I'm sure, explore all of these in some detail. But until we get to the budget process and have gone through the work we're working on in terms of the funding for it, we won't know what the funding package looks like. We're not ready yet to say exactly. We know how much it's going to cost, and we're working now on the revenue to pay for it. So,
Councilor Anderson.
I'm just a bit confused. If we're talking about this for the fiscal year 2020, then for the fiscal year 19 through mid-20, nothing is going to be done or added to the budget?
Correct. The recommended next steps in the report are referring to the fiscal year starting July 1st, 2020.
So in effect, the sobering center will not be proceeding in the budget that we will be approving in a few months or 3 months or whatever it is?
That's doubtful, given the work that still needs to occur, the discussions that are ongoing with funding partners, and we also have some facility considerations that are being becoming more and more problematic because of the federal shutdown.
Sure.
So I don't think it's realistic for there to be action before June 30th.
All right. That's what I wanted to clarify, but I'll also just, and I'm sure if you need some support from the council, you might come back to us, but I'm looking at what the partners have offered and looking at what they actually will be saving by the sobering center, and that's not enough in my view from what both the partners, which is Salem Health and Marion County, if we take on this role, we're going to be saving them a lot more than $100,000 a piece in emergency room and social services and others. So those kind of discussions need to be ongoing among the administrative level and then among the elected level if we get to that.
I have a question. I got lost on the dates there. I thought we were talking about, I just want to make sure that, I realize there's nothing going to happen in the next 6 months, but are we talking about the next 18 months there's nothing happening? That's what I thought I heard you say.
No, I did not intend that.
Okay.
I perhaps Kristen can give an update on the capital portion, and then I can speak to the operating.
In terms of the capital, as the city manager mentioned, there are some delays in terms of the environmental review and HUD approval to get the clearance in order to start construction. That said, anticipating that does get cleared up here in the next month to 2 months, the construction period would take us into the start of the fiscal year that starts July 1st, 2019. So construction would be completed during this upcoming fiscal year, and they would be in a position to start operations if they had the funding available to operate the facility.
Thank you.
For operating beginning when?
At some point in the fiscal year that starts July 1st, 19. So the 1920 fiscal year.
Thank you. So I'm hearing the council accepts the staff's recommendation. This is a number 2, and the council says sooner's better than later. This is a high priority, so put it in the budget. The manager should respond in the budget, knowing the council is highly interested.
Okay?
Keep working down.
Okay.
With that.
That seems to,
Okay.
okay. All right, so we have dealt with three of the goal areas: the good governance, a welcoming and livable community, and safe community, moving into safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure. The next item was the asset management and general.
Neighborhood enhancement.
No, strong and diverse.
Strong and diverse economy.
Safe, reliable.
Yeah, we did it too.
different. Oh, the cheat sheet is in a different order.
Oh, gosh. Well, thank goodness for that.
I'm sorry, I think you're right. I think I skipped neighborhood enhancement. My bad.
I think we agree.
No, we talked about
We
it.
got star into there. Budget.
Hold on.
Thank you. All right, so the next one is asset management and general obligation bonding strategy.
We did not. We did not.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It said we deal with it on a budgetary basis.
Tell him what you
during-
What did we decide?
This is yours. I
You
think.
decided that you would follow the staff's recommendation, which was that it was a number 2. It should be considered in the city manager's FY 2020 budget.
Okay. Not bad.
Asset management and general obligation bonding strategy.
Yes.
As you articulated it, question about moving forward with strategy and simultaneously moving on a fire need. Should it be a strategy first? Staff's analysis was, if the council wishes to consider this item as part of their policy agenda, staff will continue this work with a city council finance committee and return with additional information for a future work session. So the question was, you know, and basically it says if the council wants to make this a council activity, then it should have a work session. So that,
I can speak to it.
I think a consideration for council would be the mayor's request that the city consider a resiliency task force. And while that isn't necessarily, doesn't replace the need for this discussion, I think there would be a need for some council consideration of projects that might be tied to our city's resiliency. So I guess for tonight, that really poses the question of whether the finance committee is adequate. Perhaps it is initially, as the finance committee scopes out what a plan might look like, but then make sure the resiliency piece is being considered as well.
Mr. City Manager, would it be appropriate to look at the Resiliency Task Force and the Sustainable Services Workgroup, the work that those partners that those groups are doing together, to see if they could possibly fit together or complement the work? Because the Resiliency group, I see fitting some of those key performance indicators like we're talking about. It's not just one section.
If I may, I think there certainly would be some need. However, the recommendation, at least for the Sustainable Services Work Group, is a really sharp focus on the key performance indicators. And I think I would advise that if council wants to have a role in defining those, that work group, at least initially, really just focus on those key performance indicators, and the resiliency task force would be on a separate track. Those tracks could very well converge in the future, but I would suggest keeping them separate for at least until the KPI work is done.
The way I would bring the resiliency task force to you would be at some point in the next month or so, after talking with, I think, some of our key staff in terms of what that would look like. The outcome that I see is a resiliency plan for the city. I frankly think we're missing some real elements, but I would like to have some time really to bring it to you. That's on me to get that put together and work with the staff to bring you a motion to establish that task force that gives you a very clear understanding of what I'm asking for. And it will happen fairly quickly, because I think it could have some minor budget implications, and certainly will have implications on use of staff time. So I feel really obligated to come to you with a more complete package than just an announcement in the state of the city, that's what I would like to see happen.
And Councilor Anderson, then it looked like Councilor Lewis had something to say too. Nope, okay, just Councilor Anderson.
I agree with both the city manager and the mayor. We just heard about the Resiliency Task Force
Yeah.
today, and we need more discussion on it, and they certainly should be on separate tracks that may or may not meet at infinity, separate lines, I guess.
So my initial read on this one was that the asset management and bonding strategy was, yes, we want to have a work session on it.
No, I think it's, well, I'm not going to say no, but I think we have a finance committee that's actually working on and has talked about bonding strategy. We have really good advice on that committee, and I think we'll be perfectly capable of returning to you with a strategy for your consideration.
So you don't need council
No.
work session on it? So it's a number 2 then? It's just,
Not unless at some point they want to have a work session on it.
It depends on,
Then they can, as you pointed out, they can do pretty much anything they'd like to do in terms of work sessions, so. But I think we'll come with a plan.
yeah, I think we can deal with it on the floor.
That's the intent of the recommendation
Really,
of
it's
the
the staff
suggestion.
recommendation.
all right, so it's a number 2, and if the committee needs council to have a work session on it, that's where it should come from. All right. Next one is complete streets. Details of existing policy guidance, including transportation system plan, complete streets, which groups, advisory boards, and commissions are engaged in these discussions. Staff's recommendation is continue existing policy and implementation framework. If change is desired by City Council, determine the specific outcomes so the corresponding policies can be reviewed. If additional implementation is desired, identify potential funding sources or trade-offs for consideration in the context of the city's budget needs through the manager's 2020 proposed budget. So I think in a nutshell, that's also a number 2, that basically it's being handled elsewhere, and if it has budget implications, it would be considered in the 2020 budget. Councilor Cook?
So I understand that we have this policy, and I appreciate the staff report, but I feel that very strongly that what we have now is unacceptable. And I think it would warrant a work session, because I'm having trouble understanding where the gap is, that we have these policies, but I've still got neighbors on mobility devices in the middle of the road. I've got disconnected sidewalks without a network. I think being able to identify those funding sources, being able to talk about the trade-offs, having a work session is, I think, really warranted in this case, because I want to understand. I'm privileged to do this work, but I am at a loss in how to explain to someone how we have a complete street policy and you're still in the middle of the road, or have no safe place to cross or get your mail. And when you call to ask for certain things like a speed bump or enforcement, it doesn't get you the result that you feel you need, if that makes sense.
So Councilor Cook is proposing that this be elevated to a council work session, council activity this year. Councilor Kaiser.
So I think one of the things that's interesting to consider, just listening to your comments, Councilor Cook, we have neighborhoods obviously that were developed before our current policies, which I think is largely what you're talking about. Like, I haven't been to your house, but down in your ward,
You're welcome anytime, Councilor Kaiser.
You don't have a lot of sidewalks.
I have no sidewalk. I have no
Right.
street lights.
Yep,
I've got.
and it's places that were built in the 50s, post-war era, when it was all about the car.
You know what's funny
then,
though?
So then we have our current policies. When we develop new things, you have to do sidewalks. There's bike lanes.
Oh, totally.
Things like that. So I think we're kind of at this. What do we do with our existing stuff, and how do we deal with that? Versus this is the stuff we do. This is the way we do it now. So somehow I agree with you. We need to try to get at that. I don't know if this is the right approach.
Right vehicle.
Right now.
Pardon the pun.
But whatever that might be, I think would be a good conversation, and perhaps similar to our general obligation bond strategy is a strategy for how do we get at these areas that are already developed, that were developed in the 1950s or before, when it was all about the car and nobody else. So, but I think it's a little bit. I think it's we need a different approach.
So
with that.
I definitely always appreciate your feedback, Councilor Kaiser, and I appreciate your support on this body. But just to also highlight, with residential infill and with more and more people developing sublots, putting in ADUs, multifamily complexes that are going in, yes, we have a policy now that you need to have the sidewalk, the gutter, the curb cuts, the this, the that. But we are recreating the same scenarios that we leave behind because we still don't have a way to, I mean, why does the chicken cross the road? The chicken crosses the road because there's a safe place to do it and because it recognizes the risk and is able to do so safely. I think this may not be the end-all, be-all. We do have a complete streets policy in the city, in the transportation plan, but somehow from that policy to implementation, I feel like we are missing the mark. And even though in new developments, we can point to, here's the contiguous sidewalk, if that new development has a park in our master plan, which, you know, we're redoing the comprehensive plan, if the idea is everyone's able to visit a neighborhood park, everyone's able to connect to a bigger park within 5 to 10 miles, but there's no possible way for people to get there unless they drive. And then when you get there, there's 3 parking spaces. There's somehow a disconnect, and we're reevaluating these policies through comprehensive plans. It makes sense for us to do this now. It makes sense to have this step.
Councilor Nanki?
Thank you. Yeah, and you know, the gaps that we have in our infrastructure, well known, and it's, I think every year that I've sat here, we've talked about sidewalks, or the lack thereof in a lot of cases, and we tried to move forward on that once, and the voters said, we don't think so, and remanded or and killed a fee that was out there to try to fund some of that as well. And we keep adding money and a little more money and a little more money to try to move our way through those sidewalks as well. And that's not the entirety of a complete street, but it's a funding issue.
Well, I mean, to address that, Councilor Anke, with respect, and I appreciate how long you've been on this body and the work that you've done advocating for the ward, but this isn't always just a question of funding in my mind, because if there was a way to actually get where I wanted to go, just a way, complete way, I'd be good with that. But because of the way that the development happened based on the decade, because of the way neighborhoods are put together, you can have a key area like a store, a school, a hospital, that there's no possible way to get there other than one way. And that's not really a choice. And so people aren't always asking for, we want everything done all the time. They're saying, give me a way, whether it's because I don't have a car or it's not safe for me to drive, or I need a safe place to be and I need a place to work. And those are questions. This is a basic level thing that affects everybody, because we don't just live inside of our houses, we live in a community. It's how we interact with each other, and it affects safety, it affects livability, it affects community, and if a disaster happens, I know you're a big preparedness person, the fact that you have a community where people know how to get somewhere outside of a car is huge, and it's something that only serves to make us more resilient.
Sure. And if I may, the Safe Routes to School was our next step in that as well, and so we're slowly adding and trying to get those pathways to some of the most important things first, which is children and schools, and the lack of sidewalks there is why I'm actually sitting in this chair from a previous pedestrian safety bond measure, and the lack of sidewalks along 12th Street. And our comm system is really strange tonight.
They're working on it right now. They're in there.
So I'm hearing a staff recommendation that says, given other priorities, existing policy maybe could prevail. I'm hearing Councilor Cook say she'd like to elevate this to a council policy agenda item and have council work on it this year, and I'm not hearing her get a lot of traction with other council members, is how I'm reading the room. So if I've got that wrong, this would be a time to speak out.
Well, I guess the way I see it is, this is one of those things that kind of overlays several of the areas. It's the infrastructure, it's the financing, And so it's like 3 different areas that all impact our ability to accomplish this goal. I agree with the sentiment that it needs to be elevated and we need a strategy to drive to it. But I don't know, you like that? I don't know, to bicycle to it. But I don't know where to put it because it encompasses so many areas.
Councilor Rossi?
I was just going to agree with Councilor Hoy that one of the proposals from the Revenue Task Force talks about gas tax, which would help with funding some of these improvements. So part of the bonding strategy is potentially go out to another streets and bridges bond and help with sidewalks. And so I do think that while there is a policy and sort of approach kind of question, there's also, it's really a little bit moot until we have funding too. So we need to develop, if we have any questions on the strategy as it exists, then that's something we can discuss.
So another way to characterize the situation would be council agrees that this is an important issue and it's best addressed through the other things that are on this agenda as opposed to a single item, but staff should get the message that this is important to council. Councilor Lewis?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to that we already have scheduled on February 27th a Revenue Task Force work session, and we'll be talking about bonding. I'm sure we're going to be talking about the priorities of bonding, and this certainly should be a topic of some conversation at that meeting.
Councilor Cook?
I just want to reiterate, I think this doesn't just end at finances. In my mind, looking at the staff report, this isn't just, we have a policy, we just need more money to implement it. Because there are ways that we could be interfacing with neighbors that have concerns around traffic, walkability, mobility in their neighborhood, and have a stronger policy and do that policy work to make sure that when people contact, whether it's the city or their neighborhood association, to say, hey, it's not safe crossing here, or this happened, that there's an actual clear way of contacting, that there's a point, that there's policies so people can be involved. And right now, what I see is sort of it's built along, we've incorporated some language here, we've added some things here. We are redoing the comprehensive plan. This is the appropriate time to look at complete streets and redo this as well. Otherwise, we're going to be talking about how we develop, how we grow, what kind of community we want to be in, and totally excluding the part of the conversation that says, how do we interact in this community? How do we get around?
Councilor Kaiser?
If we had in a perfect world, if we had like all of the time to meet endlessly, I agree that we should completely take this on.
I am willing to take it on as a single committee. Myself.
I'm trying to work through it because one of the things that I hear you, but one of the things I don't want to happen is this just to fall off and to say we're already doing it through these other things, because some of this we're not doing. For example, we don't have a strategy for how to get sidewalks on every block in the city, for example. And I think if we maybe compartmentalized or broke it down into what are the chunks that you notice and others, like how do I get a crossing? What's that process? I mean, maybe we could tackle it in that way. So, so I'm not sure how to get there. I don't know if a work session's appropriate, if it's I hate to say it, another task force, or if it can be studied by an existing body of the city that we have, but a way to kind of tackle it maybe piece by piece, but still have this larger conversation about what it is. And so I don't want it to like totally go off the table. This specific process, I'm not sure is the right place for it.
Could we, one thought would be to refer this to the Finance Committee and bonding, that this really is the objective we've all been looking for when we put together streets, bridges, and sidewalks bond measure. I mean, this really, the funding is wildly important, but the funding spent right, I think, is exactly what we need to make sure happens. And I think if we could somehow figure out how to transmit this, and I'm sure the manager can figure out, and Mr. Lacey and others, how to put this as part of the bonding discussion agenda, that this is one of the objectives this council thinks is a #1 objective. It's been at the top of my list. I live in a neighborhood where all the sidewalks are crumbling. You know, they were built in the teens, 20s, and 30s, but they're now starting to give way. And then there's parts of the area, I'm most familiar with Councilor Kaiser's ward, because I live in it, that don't have sidewalks for whatever reason. I cannot ever figure out why. It borders, thinking of Virginia Street along Englewood Park and some of these others. So I think if we could just transmit this through, I don't know how you say it exactly, but it becomes part of kind of the objective of what we're talking about in this area.
What I'm hearing you say, Mr. Mayor, is that in the what was it, asset management session, that you would include alternative modes of travel or connectivity through walking and biking in that. And I applaud you, I'll take it, that's great. But what I want to remind council, and what I really, what I'm planting my flag on right now, let the record note, is that we have right now people that are invested and concerned in how they're able to get to work, get to school, get to where they need to go. It's not safe. They're paying their taxes. They pay a streetlight fee, they pay a sidewalk fee, they pay for, storm drain, they pay for other issues, and they don't have those things. I'm one of those people because I don't have a sidewalk, I don't have a streetlight, and I still had a stroller. I've got bus stops in my ward where there's no shoulder. Kids are waiting by the trash cans. It's an accident waiting to happen.
Absolutely.
And we could have, while we've got the transportation system plan, a bike ped master plan. We could have a bike ped board. We could be having other opportunities to bring people forward, so it's not just, one type of person with this or one type of person with that. This work is so important, and complete streets, I understand, means different things to different people. I'm hearing the group say, well, this is all about funding sidewalks, but if I see contiguous squares mentioned radiating from downtown, it's not a network. It doesn't get you where you needed to go.
I think, Councilor, I just want to assure you what you're hearing is a tremendous amount of support for this policy. This is a policy, your flag is now with all of the rest of us on that one. Trust me, this has been going on for years, working on this issue, which is why we talk about future bond measures, including these kinds of parts to it, to make sure, and that we have policies that as we do new things, it has changed over time. Unfortunately, we haven't had enough to be able to look back, and I think you're saying we have got to get a much more holistic view of this community and the kinds of problems you're describing. I just couldn't agree with you more.
But they go hand in hand with the development that's happening in the neighborhood. So help me explain, if we are not prioritizing this, if we are not saying we will put this as a #1 agenda item, help me explain to the mom that has a stroller and gravel on a shoulder where the speed limit's 35 miles an hour, why that's okay, and why we have a complete streets policy, and once we pass a bond, somehow that'll get prioritized.
So I'm hearing several counselors say that this is very important to them, and they feel repeatedly stuck on there isn't enough funding to get the complete streets right. And I wonder if we've got this revenue strategy here, and council will give a heads up if there are other issues. I'm kind of hearing council giving a heads up right now that complete streets better be part of this. Does that?
Well, inside asset management for bonding as well.
Is that I mean, because I'm hearing folks say that talking about it at a council work session doesn't get us there if we don't get the money to do it.
Well, and I'm still afraid we'll get the money and then it's still not, we'll still have gaps. It still will have no routes. There'll still be parks with no crossings because we haven't updated the policy.
So I hear that. What do we do about it?
I recognize we don't have a lot of time for work session after work session, and I appreciate that council has other activities to do, but I would request a work session to be able to discuss complete streets.
I continue to read the room saying you're not getting a lot of traction on that.
I disagree with that
Okay,
assessment.
all right.
I think there's a lot of support for it. I just don't think we're clear on if a work session will accomplish what Councilor Cook's trying to accomplish. I think we all want to accomplish
that's
what
what
she...
I meant to say. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we all want to accomplish exactly what she's saying.
Yeah, I hear a
We
lot of
just don't
support
know
for
that a work
complete
session's going to get us there. That's the
My
question.
point exactly. I hear a lot of support for the concept of complete streets, funding for them. I hear Councilor Cook say that we also need a policy in addition to the funding. And the question is whether or not council spending time with a work session will help the situation. I think that's where I'm feeling like we're stuck. Councilor Kaiser.
So I completely agree, Councilor Hoy, I don't think a work session is going to be able to get what you're talking about, Councilor
What
Cook.
would you suggest, Councilor Kaiser?
Just trying to think, right? One of the things I think we could ask for is a staff report about what the strategy is for making our existing areas complete streets. What's the strategy there? Is one option. Because I think if we sit down for a couple hours, we're just basically going to have this conversation. We're going to recognize that there's never enough money. There's always going to be gaps, and how are we going to accomplish everything? So, but maybe understanding where we are right now with that, because I'm not totally clear where we're at right now. What's our strategy to get, everything that we want in all these existing neighborhoods? So that might be one approach. I think a work session at this point without having really definable goals isn't going to be a good use of our time right now. And I'm feeling like we don't have good, clear goals. What is the point of that work session, other than just talking about it, which is great, but our time is valuable and we need to be more goal-driven when we meet like this.
If there was no residential infill development in my ward, I might feel less urgency about it. However, at the rate of influx of people and residential infill that is happening.
So I think what we need to do, though, is get a baseline of where we're at. When that happens, when residential infill happens, what happens on a policy level? Because I think it's different than what would happen if somebody's just remodeling their house, for instance. So I guess, I don't know, one of his suggestions, and I'm totally just shooting off the hip, but it's maybe we see where we're at now and have staff invest a bit of time doing that.
So that would be a possibility that you could ask staff to give you more information. Councilor Anderson?
We've got goals. We've got staff imperative analysis of existing policies supporting the goal of creating complete streets. So I think we all agree on that goal. What we need is a progress report. Yeah. Where are we in that goal? Yeah. And then we can take whatever action we need to take after we hear from the staff, really, how are we moving toward achieving the goal?
Okay. Is that a reasonable action, that what council wants is a progress report on achieving the existing goal for complete streets?
Okay.
I think it's a good first step.
Do we need to be unanimous?
Okay, so Gabriel's got that down, and we're calling that a 3, which with an asterisk, because we probably want that report sooner than next year. That brings us to Congestion Relief Task Force. Look at Congestion Relief Task Force recommendations for inclusion in the policy agenda. And staff's recommendation was to further this initiative discussion at a future council work session. So staff is recommending that this be a number 1. Councilor Anderson?
I'm just holding up my finger.
Number 1, yeah.
Number 1. So staff's recommendation, this is a number 1. There should be a work session on it.
We had a work session.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're gonna have another
So,
one.
wait, we need to have a second one?
I don't know. I thought
Well,
we did.
if I may, I think the initial, and perhaps Julie Warnicki can help me with this, the initial work session, I think, was very high level. There are many of the recommendations, for example, that do not directly involve the city. So some guidance from council on whether you do, to help prioritize where staff will be spending its time trying to implement those recommendations. Do you want staff to approach the governor and ask for all state agencies to go to a flex schedule, for example? That was one of the recommendations, I believe, in the task force. there are some signage that are ODOT jurisdiction. So it's, you know, it could be a short work session, but some direction on okay, where, and then also an opportunity for staff to go into more detail on where we think, which I think may have been in the in the report, but perhaps didn't. I don't think was fully discussed, and that is where might there be the greatest impact, and then weighing that with the dollars that would be required. I think would be kind of the, you know, scoping out a second work session on this topic.
Well, could I recommend, as you did before, that those two were combined, maybe combine this with another one, if this is a short one, so that we don't, you know, overbook?
Or perhaps make it for a half an hour before a council meeting, too.
So enthusiasm for this being a work session, but maybe not a standalone meeting on its own night. All right?
That's
Moving forward, the Salem River Crossing. This was decide on the Salem River Crossing, provide definitive statement to the Federal Highway Administration. There is a council work session scheduled for this on January 30th, so it's coming right up. So this is another one I think is a no-brainer that it's a number one. You're moving forward with it. Anybody disagree with that? All right, that's a number one. The work session is scheduled. Moving forward. Traffic impact studies for small subdivisions. Definition, address traffic impact studies for smaller scale subdivisions as part of the Our Salem project. Staff's analysis and recommendation was include this issue in the Our Salem project, including in Our Salem allows a comprehensive view of the traffic system as it exists today and the solutions that are best suited with the city vision that is developed. The result will inform a transportation system plan that addresses this and many more traffic-related concerns. So I think staff's recommendation is this is a number two. It's in process, doesn't require council work, but if it has budget impacts, it'd be considered as part of the next budget. Thoughts on that? Does that make sense? Councilor Anderson.
I read this, and I'm still not really sure what it means. But if all we're talking about is staff is going to be looking at this and come back to us, that's fine with me. But I'm still not sure, you know, what that means. What are small subdivisions, et cetera? And I don't need to know all that now, City Manager Powers. But it, you know, maybe it fits in with the issues that Councilor Cook was raising. You know. About complete streets. I just don't know.
Would Councilor Kaiser feel comfortable adding multimodal traffic impact studies for smaller subdivisions? That would allow for connectivity on a not only vehicular but also neighborhood paths, foot traffic, bike traffic, accessibility.
Well, I'll just speak to, I think I put this top item on actually, I didn't ask for it to be added. I think it got added. It was like a comment I made. But to refresh, you know, your memory, this was about, we have small subdivisions that come up 20 lots or something, and they don't qualify for a traffic impact analysis because they don't generate enough trips per day. And then over time, cumulatively, you get a lot of traffic in an area that they never had to do a traffic impact analysis. So it was kind of getting at that issue is what it was. This issue getting discussed in the Our Salem, I think, is fine. I don't think we need to have an action like right now on it. I don't think it's something that's going to be solved easily because you get into a lot of, you know, who gets to develop first and who gets left holding the bag, basically at the end.
That sounds like a number 4 with a heads up to the Our Salem effort that don't overlook this issue.
Now that this has been explained to me by Councilor Kaiser, I agree. I mean, I see that point, and we talk about that all the time. Yeah.
Underneath that level.
Yeah, the water level keeps rising, and pretty soon it spills over, but only the last person is responsible, not the other entities that build it up. So, you know, I would go with your suggestion.
So I think this is not on the agenda, but it's a heads up that make sure to not overlook it as you're doing the comp plan update process. All right, pretty straightforward. Last page. Moving into the items under natural environmental stewardship, we've got the environmental action plan. The add an environmental action plan, staff's analysis was complete inventory prior to developing next steps, and that is that inventory is underway and defer council action until that inventory is complete. Is that right, Steve? So that would, essentially, I think that also would be a number 4 with the staff, knowing that their work underway on that inventory is what the staff's recommendation.
Do we have a timeline on when that might be done?
Good question. Steve?
Roman Wright, Community Development Director. The inventory should be complete within the next 6 months for sure, and we're hoping ideally for April. So that's the time frame on the inventory.
Thank you.
Councilor Lewis?
Yeah, only because of the circumstances, but I would suggest that we put it off until the end of the legislative session to see what, if anything, they do as far as the issue.
Sounds like maybe this is basically, you don't want to lose it, maybe it's a number 3. Inventory is underway, maybe consider it for your agenda next year if that's necessary out of that work.
I don't mean to quibble on legislative action, but that will, I think, to create an environmental action plan is going to take enough time that we'll be able to incorporate it. They're going to be done by the end of June. We'll know exactly what is being mandated by the state to incorporate. I think we can probably stay on our current timeline without really running afoul of changing state law. I really do. This is going to take a while to do it right. A lot of people need to participate. There's a lot of thinking to do. There's a lot of impacts that we need to consider from throughout the community, and to make sure that we get it right the first time, because people are going to have to live with this for a period of time.
I think it's more of a number 2.
Okay, Councilor Anderson?
Well, I wrote down in shorthand what you, 1, 2, 3, 4 that you said. And number 1, I wrote down policy agenda item needs council direction. So I think we've given direction, but it needs to continue to work. So from my shorthand there, you know, it's a number 1 for me. It's a policy agenda item that needs council direction. So if in fact, Director Wright, what you're saying is this is moving apace and it will continue to move apace from this point forward, then I'm happy with the existing thing, but I don't want it to get put on the back burner in any way, shape, or form.
So that seems like a definition of a number 2, is it's basically when it has budget impact, it goes into that.
I would suggest leaving it as a number 1, because I do think there will be some policy guidance that will be necessary as we begin to frame an environmental action plan that makes sense for Salem as determined by the elected officials for Salem.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's a nebulous scope here to this plan that we would like to really get some clarity on prior to even establishing a budget. So, number 1, I agree.
So number 1 needs council direction, but we're not ready for it yet until we get this inventory complete. So later on in the year. Body language in the room says that sounds okay to everybody. All right, let's keep going. We're down to, we got 4 more left. Comprehensive solid waste management strategy. And the staff's analysis and recommendation is recycling reports will be provided to City Council as information reports. City will continue with recycling information, sharing, assisting the haulers and county. The Marion County Solid Waste Advisory Committee can include a Salem representative. A counselor would add an elected official's perspective to the committee. There's not currently a city participant. If City Council desires a stronger role in solid waste management, discussing specific desired policy outcomes is recommended at a work session. If City Council chooses to proceed with solid waste management strategy, identify potential funding sources or trade-offs for consideration in the context of the 2020 proposed budget. So I guess the question here is this something that the council wants to step into further than you already are? Or is it the other agencies that are working on this adequate?
I'll go first, I guess. I think getting information reports on recycling would be helpful.
Yeah.
I think having a representative from Salem would be helpful too. I'm a little surprised we don't, actually,
Yeah.
since we're the largest city in Marion County. So I think we should do that or explore that. I don't know how that happens logistically. Those two things I think are kind of low-hanging fruit to deal with this issue. And if we want to explore it more, then we should specifically set goals for what we want to explore. So at this point, I don't know what those things would be, and I don't foresee a work session happening unless something specific comes out.
Steve, did I understand this right? What you basically need is a volunteer to be on that group,
Yes.
right? So if a council member wanted to volunteer to be on that group.
Yeah, subject to the, council's process or the mayor's process for appointing someone or asking for someone to volunteer.
Why don't we give you all a chance to think about how deeply you really do want to step into this, and just let me know. If we end up with multiples, we'll work it out and get somebody on there.
Councilor Cook.
So the reason that a comprehensive solid waste strategy, waste management strategy, I think needs to be coming up, like you had said, Councilor Kaiser, we are the largest municipality in the area. We do not have jurisdiction on where our waste goes, but we do have ways that we can help ensure better environmental quality and action plan. This is something that comes up time and time again. We had to raise garbage fees twice in the short time that I've been on council, and not because any of us wanted to or needed to, but because that's what we were told we needed to do based on facility operations and based on the agreements that we have with haulers. I did not like being in that situation. It's unsustainable, and it's something that we need to revisit. So if we are limited in how we approach this issue, having a comprehensive solid waste strategy makes sense, and we need to be able to best advocate for the people living here generating waste to make sure that it's in line with our environmental plan. It makes no sense to do one without the other.
So the question is, do you want to take that on as a council work activity this year, or is appointing a councilor to this regional task force adequate? Councilor Anderson.
Yes to the first, no to the second. Just appointing somebody, we're gonna have to direct that person as to how they do it. So, and to what position they take for the city. That's what we do on SCATs. That's what we do on other organizations. We have a representative, but the council takes a position, and it's the representative's job to reflect that position. And I think the same thing is true with waste management, that we ought to have somebody on that group, but we also ought to have some further direction to that person. And I came away from the work session with the county that there's not a whole lot we can do in terms of making the ultimate decision, because if I recall, we need the county's permission to take our stuff to a landfill, is what I remember that as being. So in that situation, we better be able to take a stronger position with respect to solid waste management.
I would just caution you, Councilor Anderson, that be careful about, I would see that as a false choice, incinerator or landfill. Yes, that's assuming that the amount of waste that we generate in our area always stays the same across time, and that those are the only choices. Cities larger than us, cities in areas all over the world are dealing with waste, and they're dealing with it in innovative ways. And if we look at, if we continue to look at problems without identifying their root causes, without drilling down to see what the main issues are that are contributing to this, I think we won't be satisfied with the results.
No, I agree with you, Councilor Cook. I wasn't saying that this is one or the other. I was just saying here is an example of where we don't control the policy. If we wanted to do this, we have to ask the county's permission, not if we wanted to do this because it is the right thing to do and the only way to do it. I mean, it's, it's not a zero-sum game in this. So, yeah. So everything you said is exactly right, and we ought to look at it.
Okay. So this is a number 2? What is this?
I need direction on this issue. Of all of the issues on the list, this is one that the city would be going into an area that we're currently not resourced. We have less than one position that helps with the franchise management and responding to resident concerns and complaints. So if council does want us to embark on a solid waste management plan, I need some direction, not necessarily tonight, but certainly when you are into the budget, I'm going to have to present this as a trade-off. We're going to have to do something differently, either more revenue or give up something to free up staff time or budget to retain some outside help to help develop a plan that works specifically for Salem.
Could we, would you all agree? I liked what Councilor Kaiser said. I think if we can get somebody on the solid waste, we'll have jumped a hill. We really will have accomplished something. And getting the recycling reports, I don't think will be a massive job for you. It'll come really, it'll something we're asking of the county as one of their clients. The others we can then work through as we get into the budget, take a look at some of these other policies as we get going and a little closer. So that I heard what Kaiser said, and I thought it made sense to me.
So to me, it's more of wading into the pool rather than jumping into the deep end.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're ready to jump in. I want to find out how many of you are interested in serving on a solid waste.
Yeah.
I would do it.
Somebody's interested and Yankees interested. All right.
So that sounds to me like, by all means, appoint somebody to the task force.
Okay.
Complete these reports that are underway here, and then consider getting more involved of it as part of the budget deliberation.
That be okay?
That's fine, and I agree with the city manager at some point,
Yeah.
We've got all these ambitions, and we don't have all the ability to achieve them all. But, so that's why, at some point, maybe we will need a work session so you can explain to us, here's what it would cost in terms of if we got involved with it more, this is what it would take in staff time, here are the trade-offs, that sort of stuff. So,
Well, we'd also have a representative that can come back to us and
Right.
tell us how this whole thing
and
works.
give us a report, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, do we have to ask somebody's permission to put somebody on that force? It's
We'll
not
find
ours.
out. We know how to, we can talk.
I think they invited us at the.
And certainly, I think that was an outcome from the work session in December, the county's recognition that the city is starting to show more interest in this area.
Good.
Okay.
Okay, 3 more. Moving into the last section is strong and diverse economy. Tourism promotion area. Add tourism promotion area to the list and consider whether it should be for TOT board. What's the TOT board? Thank you.
Tourism and Cultural Advisory Board.
Staff's analysis is, if the city council wishes to consider this item as part of their policy agenda, staff will return with additional analysis on costs for administering the collection process, considerations regarding existing contracts with short-term rental providers and intermediaries, and options that consider TOT funding allocations that work towards city results.
This is one I added, and I'd ask you to kind of move this as a number 2, have staff continue to work on this. I will remind you, I think I'm correct, that the materials we received indicated there may well be $500,000 or $750,000 available to the city's general fund through a program like this. And I think having staff explore it more, look at costs and some of the other things, but I think it's worth moving forward on. This is a really well, and the people being taxed are the people asking to be taxed, sort of. The people who collect the tax are asking to tax the people from out of state or out of town that come to town. I think that's probably a more accurate description. Okay?
I hear general support for moving forward. This is part of the budget process. All right, very good. Hillcrest Youth Correctional Facility acquisition considerations. This is one that came up after your work session on this before. Staff's analysis is, if council wishes to pursue acquisition for city use, identify trade-offs or revenue sources to fund purchase. If council wishes to influence redevelopment of the site, create a work group to identify a specific way the city could assist the Oregon Department of Administrative Services and developers. So there are two parts of that. Do you want to find money for the site? And the second, do you want to create a work group to try and influence the development of the site?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Find out if we can do it. Kristen, can we do it?
Creating the work group?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a limited vision answer. Let's hear the
Well,
big
I guess a reminder for council, the site has no water.
Right.
The buildings are not necessarily assets. They are limited in their reuse potential. Would you agree with that, Kristen?
That's correct. So, when we talk about the assets that we already have, the infrastructure we already have, and challenges in maintaining that, this will be adding a lot of square footage to that portfolio to maintain for some period of time, whether or not we end up turning around and selling it in the future. But there would be a period of time, if we did acquire it, where we would be taking on additional expense to operate it or even to mothball it.
Councilor Anderson.
As much, I almost hesitate to say this because I'm always talking about when is an urban renewal area going to end and what are we going to do, but the description that was given by the city manager sounds like that is the description that is used to support the forming of an urban renewal district. And I'm thinking about Portland Road, which we've all said, look at what a good job we've done. So, that to me ought to be explored a little bit. And I know it's kind of connected to Fairview Industrial Park, and Fairview Industrial Park is the one I keep saying we ought to shut down, but I think the task force ought to look at that because that's a valuable asset and there's a lot of things it could be used for. But again, we've got ambitions and do we have the money? And one way to get the money might be some sort of urban renewal district.
hence a work group, right? So the staff recommendation's a work group?
Steve?
I think Kristen can provide some additional detail. Can provide some additional detail on what a scope might be for a work group.
So I think a work group to look at urban renewal potential for acquisition, which probably just in terms of the feasibility would not be creating an urban renewal district there, but maybe amending the Mill Creek one, where we would have more capacity. To look at that because it would also require approval from other taxing districts to do that, and so we'd be building that partnership as well, and then also working with DAS about timing and the condition of the buildings.
The State Department of Administrative Services.
Ossex people.
So that work group, I think in forming that work group, it may make sense to look at some of our other taxing district partners that would have to approve pulling that into the urban renewal area and to talk with them about any benefits to them as well for doing this.
So you're saying there's a chance that Fairview Industrial Park might be closed down at some point if you
Well, the
tie it
Fairview
together.
Industrial Park, we have not been collecting our tax increment there.
Councilor Nanki.
Thanks. And as I was mentioning, yeah, there's just a little bit of money that we use for an incubator and grant program. So that being said, state property that's not on the tax rolls at all is a wonderful option for urban renewal.
Yeah.
And because essentially you're paying for everything as you build it, and when it comes on, everybody gets more money and nobody lost any along the way. Unless, of course, it's prime for standard development where demolition and environmental remediation costs are sufficient to inside of the profits to actually go forward with that. So without knowing what those numbers actually could be, but it'd be interesting to look at it. It's whether or not we need to be involved with it or not, especially if we can't reuse anything that's there and not knowing
It would be challenging.
what kind of environmental issues might be.
Mayor Bennett?
Would this be, Counselor Nanki, would this be just an appropriate, rather than creating a separate work group, just having the Finance Committee take it on as part of its workload?
Sure.
Yeah, because we skip a meeting here or there.
Yeah.
And this could be something that
Well, it
could
wouldn't
be
add to
pulled in.
anyone's workload that way.
Yeah.
And it would let us work with, we'd have
But
people
we could use one of those
operating
meeting
inside of
slots to
finance.
actually talk about it.
Would it? Okay. That might be, the only amendment I'd make would be to just refer this to the Finance Committee and let
So
it be reviewed.
referring it to the council's finance committee is, all right. Very good. Okay, that brings us to the last one. High-speed internet downtown. An update on the high-speed internet downtown. Staff recommendation is complete the feasibility study. Pending results of the feasibility study, if council wishes to pursue this topic further, discussion at a future council work session. So basically, once the feasibility study is done, bring it to a council work session if the feasibility study concludes that that's worth doing. That sounds to me like it's a number one, unless you want to drop it now. Councilor Kaiser.
Just had a question more to refresh my memory, because I think I remember the committee we were in with the mayor, and I can't remember who was on it, but we brought this issue up. Is this to provide just the infrastructure, or is this to provide, do you remember, or is this to provide
Yes.
like free internet to downtown?
So
refresh my memory.
They're looking at a couple of things. So the proposal period is closed. We've received 3 proposals this week, so those are going through a scoring process right now. And we will be bringing on a consultant here within the next 6 weeks or so once we get through that process. And their scope of work is to look at the feasibility of, like 3 different options. One would be putting in conduit through the downtown and leasing that out to service providers. The other would be putting in conduit and fiber and leasing out the fiber. And then the third option would be operating as an internet service provider. So they will be looking at all of those, and then also looking at free Wi-Fi.
Is the,
Mayor Bennett.
working as an internet service provider, would we be then working with Comcast to use their fiber, or how would this?
No, this would be building out our own network.
We would still build our own network?
Yeah.
Next
Yes.
to the one Comcast has built?
Correct. So
Have we met with Comcast yet to kind of talk to them about, we'd sure like to work with you on making this a more accessible service, or?
We have not, because the purpose of doing this would be to ideally increase competition
Right,
and
okay.
and improve pricing for people,
Okay.
pricing and service.
Okay.
And in a lot of communities that have explored this, it has not made sense for them to function as the service provider, but just to provide the backbone of the infrastructure.
Okay.
So
that's
staff recommendation is once the feasibility study is complete, bring it back to the council for discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, nodding heads around the room. Okay, so that's a number one with bringing it back once
I just have one concern.
Councilor Hoy.
We only dropped one item off the list, and everything else is basically a 1 or a 2. And I'm concerned about capacity.
So I was just going to summarize. Great question. And actually, I think you did a little better than I was anticipating. As you say, one item basically is subsumed in other activities, and one was sort of deferred to the from a staff report. Everything else about split the difference between whether it's coming back for council consideration at a work session or active council activity this year, or basically being sent to the manager for consideration in the next budget. So that, the way I'm reading this is that you really want to get into this stuff now, and you're deferring most of this stuff to budget discussions as it comes along.
And if I may interject, in the budget discussion will be just that. Your direction tonight isn't necessarily translating in my mind to putting your requests into the budget. So some of this work, yes, you haven't taken it off the list, and there will be some challenging, conversations, challenging deliberations later this year.
Is there any further business then?
So again, I think you've identified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items that you definitely want to come back and have time on this year, and you have another 7 or 8 that you want the manager to consider in the context of the budget, and you can bet that'll come back for discussion as that's developed. And to me, that is beginning to be some clarity on what you think your priority for council action on this date in January of 2019, and who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, because stuff comes up. But that's my sense of this. I feel clarity on that. Is the council comfortable with this direction?
Yeah. And if I may, Brian, I also want to thank Councilor Hoy for that question, because that was certainly a concern of staff coming into this evening, and I do agree with Brian that your clarity on several of the issues was very helpful, or I would be much more concerned about the impacts on your time, on the staff resources, and certainly the budget.
Okay, it's time then for public comment. Scott Snyder. And if you're just happy with this, you really don't have to tell us how great we're doing. Although we'll listen.
Good evening, Mayor Bennett and Councilors. Scott Snyder.
Could you pull that toward you, Scott? Thanks.
Good evening, Mayor Bennett and Councilors. Scott Snyder, the General Manager for the Grand Hotel in Salem, and of course the Chairperson for the Salem Area Lodging Association. So I definitely would like to address the tourism promotion area. I appreciate the fact that the city staff included my addendum to the agenda for tonight, kind of going into a lot more detail with the explanation of exactly what the TPA is and how we believe as a lodging association it will benefit not just us as hotels and not just restaurants or lodging facilities, but ultimately will have a positive impact on our city of Salem budget. We are asking that you, which you've already done, directing the staff to draft an ordinance to allow for us to collect the TPA assessment fee of 2% to be added on to our overnight travelers' bills every day. Many of you that I've spoke to have explained when you go to Seattle or when you go to Boise or anywhere, you are paying there's additions to your hotel bill. So this is nothing that our guests will be surprised by, because they go to many of the same places that you go to. I've been on vacation this last week, and just talking about a competitive nature of our industry. I don't normally watch daytime TV, but my wife loves to watch the Today Show as she's getting my daughter ready for school and stuff. And this week I got to see, I was watching, just listening while the Today Show was on, and there was a Visit Bend ad that the destination marketing organization for Bend paid to have Visit Bend on the Today Show. Now I know they're not advertising nationally, they're just advertising in our local market. But the same ad, I saw it on the Golf Channel. I saw the same ad on Fox TV. So our competitors, people trying to draw our travelers to their market, is happening all over the place. And so we want to make sure that we're arming Travel Salem through direction from the Lodging Association and a council of operators on how to invest this money that's collected to best impact our impact where guests want to go. We are business people. We would not be looking at adding this fee if we did not believe it was going to have a positive bottom line impact. And if it doesn't have a bottom line impact, we are not going to want to continue charging our guests for something that's not working. So you have my assurance, and everyone on the hospitality board, the other hotels, that if it's not working, if we're not fixing the right recipe, that we will discontinue it, because again, we don't want to charge our guests for something that's not lucrative and making it more appealing to come to Salem. So,
great. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Zachary Cardozo. Zachary will be followed by Catherine Daniels.
Hello, my name is Zachary Cardoso. I live in Ward 2. I want to thank you for your time. I'm here in support of the library. I very much appreciate the discussion that you had and consideration of looking at the Library Advisory Board, which already exists, but I wanted to express an opinion that I feel is not as vocal, but equally important. I'm here in support of the library and their efforts to make the library a more usable space for our community and our whole community. That does come at a cost of removing some books that citizens care about, but our data reflects that it's not actually used. And by our data, I mean the community's data. I am not from the library. I don't have any data. Sorry. I think that there are definitely ways in which we can improve the library and that we should hold the library accountable to that, but that stopping them from doing what best practices shows is best practice hinders their efforts. I think that our library is there to serve our community and our whole community, not just those who are making a fuss about something that they care deeply about. I think that we should look at data that has been collected and collect more data so that we have the most accurate representation, including voices that use the library but don't have the time, resources, or any other means to make their voices heard, but are using our services, and that data is collected by the library or can be collected by the library. And I think that that's more important than just listening to any individual citizen, including myself. I think that this is also an issue of access. I know that in the seismic retrofit, we are scheduled to get 5-foot shelves, and that may or may not impact the number of books that we currently can hold, but if it does, I think that's certainly something that needs to be considered with ADA accommodations and recommendations, as well as the accessibility of items just in browsing. If the library is full of books that haven't been checked out in 5 to 10 years, it stops you from finding the books that you actually want. I think that this is an issue of the livelihood of the library and keeping it a place that the community can continue to go to and access not only the physical resources there, but all the other services, including our electronic services, our in-library programming, and other things that the library has to offer that make our community great. My last point that I wanted to talk about is I think it's very important to listen to experts. Although every citizen who is making commentary certainly has important things to say, I think that it's very important to turn to experts who have education and deal with this on a day-to-day basis.
Great. Thank you, Zachary. Very good. Really appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us. Catherine Daniels.
Good evening. As you develop your policy agenda for 2019 with respect to the implementation of the library's collection development policy, I hope you'll keep in mind the overwhelming concerns expressed by close to 80 people at the recent lab meeting. Among others, I submitted a detailed letter to you summarizing the input made at that meeting together with my thoughts and recommendations. I won't repeat any of that here tonight. Rather, I want to add a few points that I feel strongly need to be stressed, having read the library's statement submitted for this meeting. First, and I think I speak for the majority of those attending the lab meeting, our concern is not with the collection development policy itself, but rather with what we feel is the library's narrow and extreme interpretation and implementation of that policy. The library says that its goal is to, quote, reflect the diversity of the community by ensuring we carry up-to-date and in-demand materials that are well used by the Salem community, close quote. No mention is made of the library's intent to remove thousands of lesser-used books. Those of us voicing our concerns at the lab meeting, as well as many others, are part of the diversity of this community, and we want our voices heard. We do not believe that the collection development policy is being interpreted and implemented as the city intended. We do not believe that the library's justification for the intended mass removal of books is justified by the facts, and we have plenty of facts. We're so disappointed by the library's defensive posture and unwillingness to listen and respond to us. For these reasons, we urge the City Council to provide more specific interpretation of the policy and specific direction to the library in its implementation of that policy to ensure the protection and maintenance of our library's core collection for our community. And I want to thank you for prioritizing this issue in your 2019 agenda.
Great. Thank you very much. Toby Olson.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Toby Olson. I'm with the HHM Group. We own and manage hotels across the Northwest. I'd like to speak in support of the Tourism Promotion Act. I've been in over 30 markets across the country that have a great TPA or TID, and it's really helped the community and helped the cities thrive and engage travel. And I think at this time, I'm very thankful for Travel Salem and their efforts as they promote tourism around the town. If you look around our city now, we have many hotels, the Holiday Inn from Red Lion, La Quinta, major renovation, major acts going on. So we're setting records for tourism and TOT dollars coming through the city. Now I think it's a great time to continue the investment so we can look out 3 to 5 years down the road and start planning for major conventions, conferences that the city of Salem deserves. Okay, and my thing is we're seeing a little bit of tightening in the hotel industry right now. If you go to hospitality conferences, they're talking about 19, 20, the industry's going to tighten up a little bit, and that's because we're seeing everybody and their brother want to open a hotel. So we're seeing a lot of hotels around the city of Salem on the outskirts. New hotels in Portland impact us. New hotels in Corvallis, we don't get the overflow we used to. So we need to start strategically planning for ahead. And I was thinking when I was sitting here about being here 3.5 years ago, I'm proud to be the president of the Sports Commission. And we talked in this room about how important Salem and sports was. And at that time, we didn't have a half marathon. Now we do. We have a big high school basketball tournament during Christmas time. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I would encourage us to really look at the future of Salem and what we deserve. I would love to get better sidewalks in Salem, and when I'm talking about tourism, I'm thinking of investment and jobs. We're ready to open a new hotel in Salem, and we need to continue on the pace that we're doing. While I don't live in Salem anymore, I love this city, and I think we need to get what we deserve in this town and play second fiddle to nobody. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Toby. Michael Slater.
All right. Good evening, Mayor Bennett and council members. My name is Mike Slater. I live in Ward 7. I'm here tonight to encourage you to consider the creation and funding of an Office of Resiliency and Sustainability here in the city of Salem. This is something that cities of various sizes around the country have developed over the past few years in response to the very kinds of pressures that we are finding here in Salem, which is the need to manage climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, the need to mitigate natural disasters, the need to deal with solid waste issues. What we're finding here in Salem is that the complexity of the issues that we are facing today are overwhelming our current capacity of staff to plan and particularly to coordinate across departments as we manage these complex issues. And that leaves us, I think, vulnerable for the future. As you consider your budget and you consider your priorities, I would encourage you to consider establishing something like this, taking a look at other cities that have done that, and to figure out how this might be a very wise use of, I recognize, limited dollars in order to achieve your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Does anyone else want to speak? All right. Very good. Then we are adjourned.